I see you in the door. Come on in. Plenty of room. Oh, and there you disappeared. All right, let's go ahead and get this started. Welcome to Cyber Incident Response Management, what I call breaking glass. We'll get into that in a second. Is everyone awake? Because I'm not. So I drove up here from South Jordan, woke up about 5 in the morning. Where are my Walking Dead fans at? Right? Did we all catch up on the last episode? Yeah, I watched it last night. So now I've got about 5 hours of sleep, and I'm in a really bad mood. So they killed off one of the main characters, and I'm not coping well. So we'll see if we can get through this. So a little bit about me. My name is JC. I'm a senior security consultant with BAE Systems Applied Intelligence. And BAE Systems, who here has heard of BAE Systems? Good, a handful. So we're a very, very big company, and we're actually split across two, countries. We have a European side that's a PLC, so it's under Her Majesty, and then we have an Uncle Sam. I'm under Her Majesty's side, so we focus, specifically me and my team, we focus on the commercial sector for US, responding to incidents, also other security services like penetration testing, assessments, and the like. Primarily, I focus on incident response, namely proactive and reactive. Who here has not heard of proactive incident response? Kind of seems like an oxymoron, right? So, one person? So, proactive is the sense that all the activities to get ready, specifically something like this where we're building an IR plan. Additionally, digital forensics, malware analysis. Prior to the consultant life, I was in the Marine Corps for 4 years, stationed down in Pendleton. Any other Marines? None? No. Army guys? I know you're here. Yeah, I'm outnumbered. It could get ugly. And then recently I moved from Virginia. So I've been in Salt Lake for about 2 years now, still kind of learning the area. Prior to that, I was in San Diego. And so that's where you see my Twitter handle, JCSoCal, comes from. So I don't really care for the Salt Lake, Utah acronym, so I'm not going to change my handle. So getting into this talk. So why breaking glass? So over the years that I've done consulting, specifically in incident response, I've noticed a trend, a theme, if you will, that organizations, when I come in and we do incident response, and they're responding to an incident, they don't make use of the incident response plan they have. For some reason, it's ineffective for them actually during an incident. And as such, they usually respond off the cuff and ad hoc. So that's kind of the impetus of why I'm giving this talk, to try and help you develop something that's beneficial, so that when an incident actually does occur, you're able to utilize some type of guideline. So before we go on, what is incident response in terms of our IT security posture? I had this debate with somebody that incident response was actually a part of your security posture. This helped prevent you from being breached. Does anybody agree with that? Good, because I'm going to blow you out of the water right now. So the reason, and I have this slide, right, the little firebox, is essentially incident response happens, and if you read the abstract of the talk, I'm equating everything to fire. If you have a fire going on in your building, what good is all of the precautionary measures that you've taken to prevent fires? For instance, making sure that you don't daisy chain surge protectors, you don't operate your toaster ovens right next to your shred bins, the safety precautions. It's over, your building's on fire now. So that's kind of why it's not really a part of your security posture in the sense that it's going to protect you. This is really the Hail Mary for you to save what is already burning, to stop whatever attack is going on. So, what I want to do is I want to define what a security incident is, what does an incident response plan look like to me, and then also how should our organization respond using that plan. So before we get into that, as I mentioned, there's a lot of difficulties with organizations understanding this. For the past couple years, I've noticed this, and I've actually titled it. This is coined by me and another consultant who started to observe this effect in the wild, and I've been dubbing it the Chupacabra effect. Who here knows what a Chupacabra is? Yeah, sure you do. So, and therein lies the problem, right? A bunch of hands came up, but out of the ones that raised their hand, who has actually seen a Chupacabra? Yeah, okay. Now I know who my jokers are. Perfect. So all of a sudden the hands went drastically down, but they know about it. And that is the big problem with incident response plans, is essentially there's little to no firsthand experience in writing this. It's something we know we need, some regulatory requirement states that we have to have it, but we don't know what it actually looks like. We've never written one. The next problem is that there's multiple opinions on the subject. So for everyone that raised their hand that knew what a Chupacabra was, if I handed you a piece of paper and a pen and told you to doodle me one and collected them at the end, they would all be vastly different. And I kind of wish I did bring paper and pen. If you guys want to go and start doodling them while I talk, I'll hold them up at the end. And then probably the thing that's a nail in the coffin for this, that kills it, is there's no single authoritative source to cite. So a lot of you might say there's the NIST, right? There's the 800-61 that we can use, and that's our authoritative source. So let me back up. Who here has a fully functional, working, no doubt in your mind if an incident happened, you could break it out, incident response plan? I'm not going to count a half hand. That was kind of wavering. But that's excellent, because that means hopefully this talk is going to be very effective. Unfortunately, that's not great in the landscape of being prepared. With that being said, out of the hands that didn't raise, how many of you would say you've started the initiative or need to develop an IR plan? Much better. Excellent. So this is going to junction perfectly. So out of the hands that raised, how many of you have referenced NIST? How many have went through a couple pages and then threw it away? Yeah, it's big, right? It's cumbersome. Nobody can really use it accurately, right? There's great points in it, and I'm going to show you the one great point. This is pretty much the tried and true response process. It consists of 4 main stages. You've got your preparation, detection and analysis, your containment, eradication, recovery, and your post-incident activities. And you'll see the life cycle. And the life cycle actually works really well, where you prepare, then we detect something, and you're going to literally go in circles until you clean this thing all the way up. Please come on in. There's plenty of room. And then once you clean it up, you're going to start documenting it. And then you're going to put everything away and wait for the next fire. So specifically, we're going to look at the preparation phase of this. And what that means is we're going to talk about definitions, we'll talk about the documentation, teams, and logistics. So the first thing I want to do is I want to define an incident. This is my definition. You can change it how you like. I've had Twitter debates. I put this up on Twitter, and there were some debates about it not matching other people's interpretations of an incident. However, I attribute it to 2 main things. The first thing is human root cause, and the next thing is malicious intent. Does anybody feel like this is a good definition? All right. I've got to make some believers out of you. Again, I've won. Yes! Oh, that's a question. Yes. I'm coming at you now. So being a former Marine working in artillery, I don't have great hearing at all. But I don't mind coming next to you and talking to you. So what was that example?
The example was, this was given at one of the Novell-sponsored training events down in Las Vegas 20 years ago, roughly. And what they said was, we went to a company and they said, we're going to, and the CEO said, we want to restore all backups at once.
Right.
And that's what they tried to do. Didn't work so well.
No, probably not. And so are you saying that could be an incident? That could very well be an incident. That's a great example. And we're going to rip that apart a little bit here. But that would be an IT incident, right? And, sorry? Right, we have our human root cause, the CIO or CEO, as he mentioned, but restoring all the backups doesn't have malicious intent. And that's the differentiator I want you to use to keep from pulling out this response process, to keep from calling people up on your recall roster and executing incident response. So we're trying to find a way to differentiate. So to his point exactly, Bob accidentally trips over a cable in the data center, causing an outage. The goal here is that, yeah, we can attribute it to a human root cause, and we'll get into root cause analysis, but it doesn't have malicious intent. Right? As such, there's no reason to respond with detection, analysis, containment. No, go plug the cable back in, Bob. Right? So we want to prevent that from spinning up all these resources. The next thing is a Sharknado destroys your data center. Essentially, this is my act of God, right? We don't have a human root cause, and malicious intent is kind of, I don't know if you've seen the movie. It's a great, great movie. I don't know why it's not up for Oscars. But it's the malicious intent is kind of iffy, right? Where the sharks look pretty malicious when I watched it, but it's also not something that we can really fix with incident response. Now, more to the Twitter debate. Somebody brought up a great example. When we look at human root cause, malicious intent, what happens when you accidentally send an attachment that has a bunch of PII, HIPAA, credit cards, or whatever to someone that you didn't mean to? Do we have an incident? Do we have an incident? Yes. Here's the rub. And this is why I use this definition. Do we have human root cause? Do we have malicious intent? We don't. And the reason why I'm so focused on that is when we think about the incident and the incident response life cycle, there it is, look at all the steps we have to do with detection and analysis, containment, eradication, recovery. We really just have to tend to what we know was already leaked. There's no malicious intent, which means nobody is trying to subvert anything. Everything's out in the open, and you're really just responding to a data breach cut and dry. You know exactly what was taken. The person is being cooperative. Now, if the case was suddenly shifted, where JC, the malicious employee, is sneaking emails out and your DLP filter catches it, and then when you interview me, I play dumb, then we're probably going to step into the lines of malicious intent. So that's why I focus on the malicious intent part. But I feel like my definition works well for a lot of my cases. You might have to tweak it for yours or your business. Is there any questions before we move on? Yes, sir. To an extent, and we'll talk about that at the very end as we talk about testing. That's a great point. And so who here is penetration testers? Yeah, all blue team. Excellent. This is like the most blue team ever. So the problem with penetration testers is, yeah, you should treat them. And in most cases, you won't know a penetration test is going on or when it's conducted. That should be coordinated with your CIO and unbeknownst to you. And then it's beneficial because then you can treat it like malicious activity, and there's no real harm in responding to it because it gives you a good test. And we'll talk more about that. That's a great point. You can treat penetration tests however you want. I know a lot of companies will have vulnerability scans, and then they whitelist the vulnerability scanner in their SIM. So even though it's popping up a bunch of alerts, they just ignore them. It's up to you. I also have been called out to incidents where the company hired a pen test who didn't document what they popped on their network, and so we were responding to malware from that penetration team. So we open up the binary and they put their little signature, which was really nice, because we were able to call them up and say, hey, did you do this on this date to this box? Yes, and we were able to close the case. It's a little costly for the company, but there was no real malicious intent, so we could de-escalate right away. Again, the definition is up to you. You can tweak it how you'd like. Any other questions? That was a great question. Excellent, Sharknado, Bob. All right, so there's really like the quintessential IR plan. It sounds like everybody is sitting on it right now. It's small, it's generic, it's unreliable, and usually it's unfinished. On the other end, I've been to a few places where it's the direct opposite. It is heavily documented, it is very regimented, and it is the most difficult thing, one, to read, let alone use. Anybody have something that big and verbose that documents when an AV alert pops up, they have to do step 1 and then step 2 and step 3? Good. I want to try and keep us away from that mindset because that's a horrible way to do it. I want to introduce you to my framework approach. So, military history buffs might know my friend Helmut von Moltke. He was 1830 general field marshal in the German army, and he essentially said, his quote doesn't really work for me, but it essentially boils down to no plan will survive the battlefield. So what that means is no matter how well you plan, how well you think and strategize, the second you actually go to use it, it's going to fall apart, right? Things are unpredictable. And really, it's unfair to sit us in a room and task us with walking through every type of incident and all the different variations of an incident and trying to combat it. So, ideally, we should keep that in mind when we build our IR plan. And we should start with a high-level IR framework. This is the simple goods that we can abstract and we use always, right? Our teams, our severity levels, the things that are not really specific to incidents. Who has heard of an incident playbook? 2 hands, cool. So, out of the 2 hands that raised, what's your definition of an incident playbook? Sure, I'll pick you first. You raise your hand. It's your strategy. Answer in the blue? Oh. It is a plan. It is a plan. So where's my football players? So what was that? I think 2 or 3 hands. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt and say 3 hands, right? Somebody might have done Pop Warner or something. So out of the 3, right? What do we think about the Star Wars commercial that aired during the football game, right? That was pretty cool, huh? We were like the only guys that saw it. So for those that played football, and for those of us, including myself, right, that didn't play football, there is the idea of a playbook that consists of plays. Based on the situation that you're in, there might be a play that's the most beneficial for you to execute to try and help you win the game. Our win is essentially trying to stop this incident. So the idea behind an incident playbook is that it's a very focused approach towards a specific incident type. And what we can do then is not get bogged down or mired down by all the details in these really big IR plans that everybody tries to encapsulate. And we'll talk more about that in detail. But first, let's rip through an IR framework. In the IR framework, essentially you have 5 things that you want to capture. You can capture more based on your organization. These are the ones that I suggest you start with. The first one is authority. When we started this talk, a handful of you raised your hands and said we were working on an incident response plan. How many of you are doing this out of the goodness of your heart versus being mandated by a C-level or equivalent to get this done? So I assume the rest of you all have some type of executive backing, yes? Anybody not have executive backing that's trying to undertake this? Excellent. We have 1 person that's charging up the hill. Don't stop. Don't stop. Keep doing what you're doing, but try and seek this authority. Because authority is going to get you the funding, right? And so we're talking about funding for headcount, for training, for equipment, everything you need to actually respond effectively. The next thing it's going to do is, 1, give you approval to operate, and interface with the business on your behalf. Approval to operate is pretty important when you're about to unplug a server or disconnect the entire corporate network from the internet, which in some cases might be justified. So these are the guys that are going to back you up when things are actually going bad. The next thing was interface with the business. There's a very good chance that you, in your organization, don't understand how everything interacts with everything else. This is the person that can help carry the message and show the reason why your actions are necessary and why they need to be done now. Any questions about authority? Before you go any further, make sure that you've secured this. Cool. Next thing is teams. You need the A team, not the B team. You need the A team. So essentially, you need to have your incident response team broken out into 3 main groups, and this seems the most effective. You're going to have a primary team, and that primary team is the team that you're going to usually consult or contact the most. So essentially, anytime anything goes bump that you feel meets the definition of an incident, these are the team members that are probably going to be included in that discussion. The next thing is your extended team, and these are going to be people that have business roles that can assist you in responding to an incident. And then lastly, third parties. And there have been some doozies of incidents where third-party support was critical, but because we didn't future pace this and plan ahead, it just wasn't there, and we'll talk about that. The first thing, so how many of us in this room are split between IT duties and security duties at the same time? Nice, nice. But don't worry, guys. You got the shadow IT group doing IT for you, so you can focus more on security and trust them. Yeah. So we're fighting that fight. Excellent. So essentially, you need your. How many of you in this room have all 5 roles here? Congratulations, you're the one-man A team. So essentially, I hope that you're the one-person team simply because your organization isn't big enough to warrant additional headcount. Yeah, right. So you want to split it down to an IR lead and an IR analyst at the minimum. And the benefit of that is you have one person coordinating the high-level execution of your incident while the other person researches. Because how many of you have tried to conduct analysis on an incident right now and got bogged down by phone calls from everybody wondering what the status is? What was that? That's why I drink so much, is right? You laugh, I drink, right? We all celebrate this in our own ways. So essentially, you want to have that security role split out at least at those 2 levels. And what that's going to do, it's going to enable you to interface with the business, look at it from a big picture, while at the same time someone's trying to figure out what actually happened. Additionally, you're going to need the support of your server teams, your network teams, your help desk team. Do not underestimate those of us that are lucky enough to have a dedicated help desk to leverage their assistance. By doing this, we can take off a load of work, especially from the analyst side. If we'll get into playbooks, but a playbook could simply be taking an acquisition of a server. How many of us have taken acquisitions, forensic acquisitions, to do analysis? A handful, right? It would be much better if we could pass that off while we do other things, correct? Because those take a while. I'm getting some nods, so. Next thing, and probably the hardest one, because you can't just put these guys in the IR framework and give them a task, and then when an incident calls, oh, you're in the framework. They're not going to have a clue what you're talking about. You're going to want your different business executives. So a lot of organizations are split into different business areas, all with their own unique mission or objectives. You're going to want to make sure you have the ear of those people to help understand the risks and communicate the problem of the incident, how it impedes the business, and why it must be remedied. Or, this is going to suck, not remedied. There's a few organizations that want to accept the risk. Yeah, we know it's talking to China or Russia or wherever, and 20 gigs have left yesterday, but we're going to ride the risk. How many of us have that as our daily lives? This poor guy. Well, we're going to get a beer after this, you and me. The next thing is your legal team. Secondly, after the executives, your legal team is your best asset. They're the ones that are going to make sure the acquisitions that you take, the documentation that you keep, is all accurate and able to be used in court if the need arises. They're also going to help you in determining what you can do and can't do. Probably one of the worst incidents is insider activity. When you think insider activity, what do these people have? They usually have a business asset and then a home asset. A lot of times they cross-contaminate. So they're checking their email or they're VPNing in from their home connection. They're pulling these files down. So if you detect and determine through whatever solution or process you have that you have an insider threat and they're pulling this data down onto their home computers, what are your options? Talk to your legal team. What's that? There's exactly, and human resources are on there. That's a great point. There's a lot of different avenues you can take. So making sure legal HR is in there. Your communications team. We got into the discussion of handling a breach, whether accidental or intentive. You're going to have to communicate that information out. There's a good chance that your communication team has never thought about how they would disseminate information about a breach to its customers or to the general public. Next, how many of us have risk and compliance teams? One. So this poor guy. So on top of that, these guys are putting all these mandates down on you that makes your job even harder. So ideally, your risk and compliance can help you in identifying, before you go to executives, in understanding what the problem of this asset being compromised or this data being leaked is. If they're a tip-top compliance or risk team, they've already done the analysis to say these are our crown jewels and this we could care less about. Physical security, how many of us have proximity cards, badge access, key logs, camera footage? Who here has had to review camera footage? Oh yeah, that face. I make that face every morning I wake up, right? Camera footage is the worst thing. However, if it works, it is great, especially for incidents where somebody walks into a server room because it's a physical Windows Server 2008 box and remote authentication has been disabled, so the only way on there is to actually physically log in. There's a camera in the data center, and then you can correlate and say, that person, yeah, you, actually logged in, and then you have a better case. Camera footage is really important. There are times when we feel that that is the best way. We know the guy logged in, we have the date timestamp, physical security, get us the camera footage. Well, that happened 42 days ago, and we only keep 14 days of camera footage. So keep that in mind when you work with these teams and you ask for their help and input, because they're going to be able to give you those numbers. So you know the second that you have an incident, you have 14 days of footage. We need to capture it right now and pull it off. We can't wait. And then there might be other teams that you can think of. Any questions with this list? Again, the big point is to take this list and go work with these teams and make sure they understand their roles and how they can assist. A lot of that will be in discussions, learning their job roles, because not all legal teams are the same. Not all HR teams are the same. Some are comfortable with some things, some aren't. Some of you might, and we'll get into third parties, have your legal team actually request out to things like outside general counsel to weigh in on these matters. They may not be equipped for things like data breaches. So I talked about third-party IT. This is probably one of the most painful ones. How many of us utilize some type of remote hosting? We don't actually own the host or the data center to handle our servers. Don't be shy. There's a handful of us. Think about this from an incident standpoint for the few of you that raise your hands. If an incident happened on that server, how would you get that data? What contractual obligations does that company have to fulfill that request? Is it a shared host with a bunch of other tenants on it, and so you can't get anything except maybe just a few logs? Out of everyone in the room, how many of you feel like that's an eye-opening question that we need to start asking? Contractual obligations with our providers and what they're responsible for and how they can help us. Next thing is forensic firms. How many of us do not have the capability to do our own digital forensics malware analysis? Everybody's got it? A handful of us, we're just understaffed. We don't have it, we don't have the technique, we don't have the capability, we don't have whatever. Making sure we have some type of retainer is beneficial that we can call somebody up on. If you've noticed in the news, there's been lots of data breaches, right? These data breaches happening usually in the press release, they'll say we're working with law enforcement and we're working with some leading provider of security solutions or something. Well, all these people are getting tied up. They have so much human resources that when you have an incident, who actually has people available to come at you in 24 hours? So that's a difficult thing, making sure that we have that on staff. The other thing is, if you don't have a retainer, think about the legal requirements, the NDA. If you guys just try and purchase a router, right, what a pain is it to just get that PO approved? It's a pain, right? Now you've got an incident. You can't circumvent your legal processes, your procurement processes. Those all exist for a reason. So try and get ahead of them. Oops. Law enforcement. Who here has communication with their law enforcement group, whether it be police, FBI, Secret Service? They work with them. Excellent. There's a handful of you. They usually have great information to give you about something related to your industry or overall in general. You can usually take these, and they're usually full of IOCs. You can scan your network for them, and sometimes you get unlucky enough to find something, and that's beneficial. You're working with them, they can usually offer, because they've provided the IOCs, they understand the case, and they can help augment your response. They can tell you why you might have been targeted, or they might be able to do analysis on your behalf. But it's important that you start contacting and working out those relationships. How can you each benefit each other? Public relations team, kind of like communications, in the event that they're not skilled enough to handle a breach response. So for instance, how many of us have had our identity or credit cards compromised from a breach? Man, that was the fastest hand I've seen in the West. That thing shot up like a rocket, yeah. So there maybe more so than others, but we've all felt that, right? How did they communicate? Websites, email, physical mail. We all got something. Is your public relations team capable of performing those? Are they able to set up a 800 number? Are you able to drop a website for people to get more information? These are things that will benefit us if we plan for them. And then lastly is cyber insurance. Who has cyber insurance? Yeah, it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing at all. Most of the time they're going to cut, sir.
Fun story.
I love stories.
We got our cyber insurance policy started, I think it was September 1st of this year, and September 7th of this year we found out that a database 2 years earlier we had sent to a third party we were working with got left on an unsecured Amazon cloud and was exposed and had to deal. So less than a week after we signed our cyber insurance policy, we used it.
Nice, cashed in on that in a week. I'm sure they were stoked to be so helpful.
Yep.
Yeah, that doesn't really work in the actuary tables.
Their lawyers were like, "Are you sure you didn't get notification about this until the 7th?"
Yeah, I bet. But that's a great example. It is beneficial. It is good to have on your side, and so you have a personal story out of all these third-party teams, right? The forensics firm, the external legal, the public relations. Were they able to assist with that?
Yeah.
So usually you can knock all these out in one punch with cyber insurance, and it's beneficial because they know exactly what they're doing. There is an extent or a limitation of what they can help with. It might go off after 200 hours, but...
Well, what's interesting with that is I work for a local government, right, a county government. So we have our own DA's office, we have the county sheriff's department, all the rest of that is our assets. But with the cyber insurance, they essentially stepped in as the interface to all of those agencies for us and said, hold off, we've got our pros first.
Right.
So they had their own legal team work with the district attorney. They had their own private investigators work with the sheriff's department. So, I mean, they still were the interface, even though we have our own assets in all those areas.
Sure. So what he's saying is this cyber insurance group came in and interfaced with all the different departments that he had. So in his case, a local government, right, having their DA office, their law enforcement, you not being government, have your legal team, your physical security, they're going to come in and interface and help you run that incident, which is a great feeling, especially if you've got nothing. Chances are, though, for your cyber insurance, they wanted to see some documentation and how you ran to be able to quote you your policy, right?
It took us almost a year to get the policy approved from the time we started trying to get it.
Excellent. So about a year it took. So this isn't something we can call up Geico 15 minutes or less, and we've got it. Cyber insurance. So the next thing after we've got our teams is logistics, right? UPS and whatnot. First one is email distribution groups. How many of us have an email distro that we use for just security messages? Excellent. And a call bridge? Great. How many of us have actually used that call bridge to talk about an incident vice the email distro? So I'm hoping it hasn't been that big of a incident. The other thing that's beneficial is a war room. When an incident gets big enough, nothing substitutes like having everyone in the room at once. That level of knowledge is just amazing. I've been in a handful of war rooms. One was slightly smaller than this. This was a huge Fortune 500 company, and when we talk IT teams, these guys have like a 40-person server team, a 40-person network team. So when you get all these heads in, amazing things happen. But that's only beneficial when you get them all in a room talking to each other and hashing it out. So making sure you have some dedicated space, probably not the lobby table or the cafeteria, something where we can shut the door on. The next thing is computing equipment. How many of us have forensic workstations? Ways to acquire data. These might be things we want to look into. And then evidence lockers. I know there was a couple handfuls of people that raised their hands. They've taken acquisitions before. Where do we put that? So the next few things are things that I see people forget about all the time in terms of their incident response plan. First one is succession of command. Who here has vacation days on the books? Yeah, we want to take them, right? So if you're out, who's it? Catering. Big enough incidents, we really, and especially if we get a war room, it's worth it to bring in a couple pizzas or some sandwiches and not have people go away for lunch or dinner if it goes to that level. Next thing is shipment of evidence. Who has geographically dispersed locations? You know who does is retail, and this guy. Retail environments suffer from this. If you have all these stores, all the stores get compromised, how do you get all that evidence back to one place? Usually they don't have a very big network pipe. So thinking proactively. And then the last one, I want to downshift a little bit. Operational tempo, right? Your op tempo. This is how hard you're going to work everybody. In one case that I worked, they had one guy that was going on for 20 some odd hours, right? He started working, he went through the night, he was still burning it, and finally he decided to go home, right? His wife was getting upset with him. Drove home, got in a car accident. Pay attention to operational tempo, succession of command. Right? It's very important that we don't overwork our people who are trying to help us. Next thing in our IR plan is we define severity. Since a lot of you raise your hands, tell me that you were also IT and security, a lot of times we get confused when we prioritize with severity. For example, we try and prioritize on user impact. For example, I want to throw this out. If you had to prioritize, right, low, medium, high for commodity malware on a single engineer's workstation, how would we rate that? Throw it out. Low, medium, high. Medium, that's pretty safe in the middle. Almost. Anybody else? Come on. Low, medium, high. You're on the spot. Low, we got a low. It's an engineer's workstation, right? What type of data is on that workstation? So I want to submit that the process involves data classification. What does that user have access to? We talk about, right, you see my little cool picture of Zeus, right? Zeus, commodity malware. I hate the term commodity malware. Commodity malware is a stupid, dumb term like APT, right? It doesn't actually provide you any information. Zeus, for instance, is a banking Trojan, right? Takes banking information. There are also bots that people sell on hack forums or some underground site access to. And then the guy that makes CryptoLocker in 2013 buys a bunch and drops CryptoLocker. So your banking Trojan just turned into a ransomware Trojan. So you can't really base it on the malware itself. You have malware on the site. That malware has the ability to drop additional payloads. You need to consider that. And then the data sensitivity. How many of us have data classification guides? One person. That's going to be instrumental, or your risk and compliance team telling you how important an asset is. If you have your secret sauce on this engineer's workstation, you don't really want to leave that up to chance. The next two things, and the last two things, are your post-incident activity. So apart from just documentation of your incident, you want root cause analysis. Root cause analysis is essential. Actually, we'll get into that. And you want your lessons learned debrief. Root cause analysis. Who has done root cause analysis before? Yeah, you. Put your hand up first. So, with our scenario with Bob, right? Clumsy Bob tripped on a cable. What's our root cause analysis?
All the cables are in a bad spot, you can trip on, and probably worth looking at relocating.
It's like we're on the same mind. Organize the cables, right? Cables in a bad spot, put them in a different spot, put some of those floor runners protection, right? Root cause analysis for this one is pretty simple, right? It's something that we can actually take addressable action to. We can fix this from occurring. Don't fire Bob. Look at poor Bob. He's got enough crap to deal with. What about Sharknado? What's our root cause analysis? Somebody else for Sharknado. That's a great point. I appreciate that joke, right? Global warming. Sure, I get it. How do we address global warming? Well, chances are our organization, you've already got enough on your plate. You don't want to deal with global warming too. So what is a root cause of Sharknado? That, remember, Sharknado took out our data center. What's a root cause that we could actually address, we could fix? Data center's not built right. It's not built to withstand a Sharknado. What was the other one? DR. We don't have a DR site. If we had DR, we could avoid this. We could just switch over to our disaster recovery site, and we'd be good. Just make sure you put it in Iowa where the sharks can't get it. So, root cause analysis is really important when we talk about incidents. How did the incident occur? Was it a DDoS? Did it occur because we've got a Windows 2000 box on a dial-up connection and somebody loaded a web page and that caused our DDoS? What was it and how can we actually address and fix it? The next thing is our lessons learned debrief. So once everything is settled, we've contained, we've eradicated, we've recovered, we want to document. How do we prevent this from occurring? Leverage that root cause analysis. Strengths in the IR plan. What worked for us? What helped? We want to find areas of improvement. How many of us are PCI required organizations? Right? How often do we have to test our IR plan? What's that? Bueller. Well, we're all PCI requirements, but we don't know which level, and we don't know how often. Annually, is that good? That's crap. How many of us deal with something going on right now? Like we're probably checking our email because there's a phishing email going around. How many of us deal with an incident a week, a month, a quarter? I might keep going until I see all the hands. Half of you, yeah, thank you. So take that time to update your IR plan. Even just say, hey, we had our lessons learned and that's the process that we use to update it. You're going to stay in compliance really easily, and you're also going to get a smoking hot IR plan. Systemic issues. Make sure you correlate these write-ups with your past incidents. Make sure you look at them and say, hey, you know what? This is like the 5th time that Bob has had a phishing email that's resulted in malware. Maybe we should hook Bob up with some special training. Or maybe this Windows 2003 server probably should be upgraded because it keeps getting popped on the DMZ, right? Let's find a way to identify systemic issues and then treat them. And then lastly, look over for errors in your final report. Make sure everything's documented. Make sure everybody reviews these that participate in the incident. Everybody gets feedback, your legal team, your HR team, your executives. Ideally, you want to have a lessons learned with every single incident. With a bunch of lows, that's not really practical, is it? So take all your lows every 2 weeks and just have a post-mortem meeting where you review all the lows. Maybe you'll find systemic issues. How many of us get antivirus alerts? Don't lie, I know you guys do. We get antivirus alerts, right? How many of us actually turn those into incidents? Was that the same hand? Does anybody not turn them into incidents? It just says, AV, cleaned it, we're done. Are we correlating and saying, hey, this same workstation kept getting hit? Or, hey, it got hit on Friday every month, the first Friday of the month? Are we looking at those things? Are we looking for trends, right? So we talk about data breaches existing for 200 some odd days, right? Why is that? Well, a virus is getting on there some way, through some route. What is it? Right? And the only thing that's separating you, I don't know if you saw Danny's talk about how your AV solutions suck. He didn't? What happened? That's Danny. So, is he here? Oh, that would have been great. So, your AV solutions do suck. They're heuristic. They have signatures. It's not very hard to evade them, right? So what's the chance that the box is actually compromised and the guy just left a script that pulls the same malware down on the first Friday of every month and you're just completely ignoring it? So consider those things. Now let's get into the playbook. The playbook is essentially a predefined response procedure for every specific incident type. So your DDoS, your malware, your phishing, unauthorized access, loss of a laptop, or theft. This is how you deal with it specifically. So these are the specific incidents that you should take and figure out, hey, if we had a lost laptop, what would happen? Would it even get reported? Would we even know? Would the help desk just ship one out to the user and just call it a day? Is it encrypted? Right? These are things that we need to put in our playbook of how we would respond. Any questions with this? It's very hard to go deep into what a playbook should have because it's very specific to your incident type. But this is where you just come up with a very specific approach for how you'll handle a playbook. As you get the incidents, so let's say our laptop was lost, we might start having a decision tree that says, hey, here's an unencrypted laptop, here's an encrypted laptop. Here's what legal's okay with, here's what they're not okay with. Here's what's okay to report for cyber insurance. This is where everything starts to come together. And it's what you can turn to reliably every single time. Any questions with this? Now, the next thing I promised you with the last 5 minutes I got is testing methodologies. This is probably the most fun, and I do a lot of work in testing, specifically around tabletop exercises and war games. That's where things get really fun. However, I bring the Chupacabra back because a lot of people talk about these things, but they don't really know what it entails. So hopefully this will try and illustrate what you should be looking for when you try and test this using these methods. First one is high-level audit. The slide deck should be in that torrent or however they provided the files. Use this as a quick audit, right? How in compliance with the stuff that I talked about do we have? What should we have? Or does this not make sense? Let's add this, let's not add this. That's very easy for you to do right when you get home today after this conference. You can do these more specific. We have this huge criteria that we look for, and we base it on your industry type, right? If you're PCI, you're probably going to want to be heavier in this area than HIPAA. If you don't have either of those, we want to be more IP specific. Next thing is an objective-based assessment, right? Starsky and Hutch fans, do it. Do it. Actually do the things, right? So if we talk about classifying an incident, we have the capability. Let's see how you classify an incident. Come up with some scenarios and classify it and see if it makes sense. Define your severities, right? The next most important one is everybody thinks they can acquire a server. Have you done it? Have you done it in the past 2 years and haven't retested? What about VMs? How many of you are running virtual infrastructure? Have you tried to acquire a server with memory for forensics? Thank you for keeping your hand up all through that. Make sure you can do that. That's huge. VMs still get popped, right? And then perform analysis. There's a lot of forensic challenges you can cut your teeth on and see if you can actually keep up. That would be a good a way to determine if you have the capability. The next thing, and near and dear to my heart because my dad once told me, Dungeons and Dragons will never get you anywhere in life. Right. So Dungeons and Dragons for me is essentially how I conduct my tabletops. Essentially, we get the people that need to be in the room. I'll either split it up with technical and then an executive, or some people like to get everybody in the room, and I'll pitch out a scenario. So instead of grabbing your sword and entering the dungeon, you're now sitting at your desk and you get an AV alert. Or my favorite is the lost laptop. And if you want, we'll talk about that one after the talk, and I'll show you how versatile it is. But everything is notional, right? We all talk about how we're going to do it, and we role play it and see if we have the capability or if we forgot anything. And that allows us to identify weaknesses. And I'm going to give you my secret sauce. Where's my Star Trek fans? Kobayashi Maru test. I do all my tabletops with Kobayashi Maru test in mind. And what that means for the non-Star Trek, we got 3 football guys, and we've got 6 Star Trek fans. So what are the rest of you? Lost in the sauce. So the Kobayashi Maru is the unwinnable test. It's a test that can't be beaten. So I structure my tabletops to drive these teams to absolute failure, right? There's no way that you're going to find the malware, stop it, be able to contain the breach. No, everything's getting out. You're done. You're hosed. And it'll all start off with a lost laptop. And what that allows me to do is take them all the way to failure and find all the weaknesses. Yes, sir. Oh, yes, just like a dungeon master, right? You seriously take all the considerations and you try and find a sponsor with inside knowledge so you can understand the technologies in play and you can plan around them. It's a great question. And then lastly, who has seen Heartbreak Ridge? Clint Eastwood movie. Oh, yeah, Gunny Highway, right? So awesome. Is the war game. A lot of people call it the purple team assessment. It's where you take your blue team and a red team pen test, put them together, and you get purple, right? So essentially a war game for us is we're going to conduct a pen test. At the same time, you see that asterisk? We're going to give you an IR liaison. And what that liaison is going to do is coordinate your activities, the blue team, with the activities of the red team and document what you're able to find, and this goes to what you were asking about, document what you're able to find, where you're lacking, and how they're getting around you. If we had Gunny Highway up here, right, if you remember the scene where Major Powers, right, would always use the recon team as target practice, always be in this position. Let's actually use our IR team to stop the pen test and see where we succeed. With that, we are done. I want to thank everyone for coming. I know it was really early in the morning. Thanks, St. Con, for setting up this great venue, and BAE for letting me come out and talk. Are there any quick questions? All right, one, and then I'll be outside and we can chat more after this. Sir.
I'd like to hear a little bit more detail what you do to prepare for the table combat.
Sure. So essentially, it's defining a scenario that has a risk that makes sense to the business. So if the business has a big PCI concern, right, I'm going to focus on stealing their PCI data. And I'm going to work with them to determine what securities they have in place, what risks they have in place, and leverage those through a scenario and slowly hand out information. As they respond, I take them further and further down the rabbit hole. I've done everything. It all depends on the amount of time we want to put in to produce it. Usually when we get into that much work, it's better off to go the war game route. You're ready to actually test the team with live fire. Excellent question. Thank you. So again, thanks everyone for coming out. That's it.